Ohledně potravinové soběstačnosti panuje celá řada mýtů a já bych dnes přímo použila to oblíbené slovo dezinformací. To znamená výrobků, které ne zcela reflektují, co skutečně ta potravinová soběstačnost je. Ta klasická definice říká, že to znamená, že země může uspokojit své potravinové potřeby z domácí produkce. Já jsem tady na tom slajdu, který předpokládám vidíte, předložila i takový ten základní vzoreček, který používá FAO. A samozřejmě ta kategorie potravinové soběstačnosti může
formula used by FAO, and the self-sufficiency can be expressed as a general figure for one country, or it can be determined per individual types of crops or products. Nevertheless, this is the Food and Agricultural Organization's approach, where you can see that food self-sufficiency is not an extreme situation. It may be 100, 110, or 0. In fact, it is a certain continuum within which we are moving and which is related to developing and maintaining domestic capacities. So the extent to which self-sufficiency is achieved for some products or commodities. And also it is about the barriers, because there are certain microeconomic conditions and links. So these are some of the misleading pieces of misleading information which is quite often spread. One of those is that food self-sufficiency cannot work in harmony with international trade, but of course that's not true. So food self-sufficiency is not autarky. So we cannot rely on domestic production only without any trading activity. But of course, it is related to the development of domestic capacities. The concept is not as black and white as it is often presented. So we will see certain statements, inappropriate statements by which this topic is being made ridiculous. I would also like to stress food security. This is related to the fact that we can obtain a sufficient amount of food via some stable relationships in trade. And this is also linked to the global environment, especially in terms of how the harvest is evaluated within a certain year and certain area. Those who are against self-sufficiency are presenting an outdated historic concept, and they often use the argument of a free market, which is questionable in relation to agriculture, because agriculture receives high subsidies. So indeed, there are obstacles to free market in agriculture, because the free market in agriculture is deformed by this support. In fact, agriculture should be a strategic sector, even though in some countries, including the Czech Republic, it is not. Now, in the long term, how food self-sufficiency is defined in time. In crisis periods, food self-sufficiency is a topic reflected in political debate. It turns into a priority, into an important topic, but when neoliberal policy prevails, food self-sufficiency is considered to be outdated, a thing which is not modern, and neoliberalism says that we do not need to be self-sufficient because we can import food and sometimes for prices even lower than if produced here. So what is important or what was important in the past was the Doha where the know-how negotiations which was within the frame of the neoliberal policy and rejecting domestic policies using the argument that everybody should give priority to where the country has some advantages, some benefits, and they should import the rest. So, this is also a matter of what the term comparative benefit of comparative advantage means. Then the food crisis in 2007, 2008 changed the thinking because it emphasized certain problems, certain issues related to biofuels as well. There were countries, big countries, that put emphasis on food self-sufficiency. And currently, we can see growing interest in food self-sufficiency and food security as well, mainly in relation to the pandemics, because the pandemics distorted or broke the long-term chains. So not only the production of chips was affected, but also the food chains on the global level were affected. And also we could see a significant increase in transportation prices, which then were reflected also in food prices, and that led to a higher interest in food self-sufficiency. Also due to the war in Ukraine, because we know that Ukraine was an important, a major exporter of food and agricultural products. So why self-sufficiency is important? What are the arguments in favor? We are mainly talking about countries which have good conditions for achieving food self-sufficiency, especially in crops or animals that are typical there. Of course, we do not want the Czech Republic to grow avocado, for example, and also self-sufficiency is not achievable in desert countries like Saudi Arabia, etc. So it is hard to say whether it is a problem of efficiency, but as we have seen, self-sufficiency can be at risk because of the problems like the pandemics or war and related socio-economic consequences. Also, price volatilities can affect it, and and also the prices of gas and oil are reflected in food and agricultural product prices and also inputs like fertilizers. What is important now is the food system resiliency, because at the moment we can say that the current crisis is not the last one, and the issue of resilience will be the topic prevailing in the 21st century, and the same applies to the whole food system. So it means the topic of covering one's own need regardless of the external circumstances. Political context of self-sufficiency. It is a topic I have been dealing with recently quite often. Economists say that food self-sufficiency is a nonsense. Often when this topic is being discussed, the opponents use extreme statements. They take up extreme positions. So we do not talk about capacities, about how to assist self-sufficiency. They try to set the topic aside completely. They want this topic to be considered as something which is completely out of context. But as regards these opponents, we can see that they are supported by foreign interests, especially the interests of foreign retail chains. Self-sufficiency would increase the security of all the food system, and it would contribute to the resilience of the Czech economy as a whole. Lastly, what I consider key, I must say that I am a macroeconomist, not a farmer, but because of that, I can see clearly that agriculture and its development here in our country are similar to the general development of the Czech economy. So it means the disintegration, the separation of production and processing, where foreign entities gained stronger position. We can see that commodities are exported, like milk, processed food is being imported, like cheese. So in agriculture, the trends are similar to the overall Czech economy. So it is a question of whether the opponents are not part of the neoliberal thinking similar to other countries where other parties' interests are being supported. So the logic is similar. In my opinion, self-sufficiency is responsibility to one's own country. It is not a matter of the pandemic period only, but the dependency is a problem in a situation where there are problems with the harvest or so, because this can lead to global problem. Dependence on transport or on imports also mean a burden, environmental burden in terms of transportation. People often talk about environmental factors, but at the same time, they support agreements with countries like Brazil, for example, and here the environmental footprint is enormous. Health factors have also been mentioned, and I would like to mention two additional topics. Production of food and their consumption on site is a key factor of local economy. So in the Czech Republic, we need to improve this. We need to weaken the influence of foreign entities, and we need to increase the position or to improve the position of the local ones. So the basics of the local economy is often often constituted by food, and self-sufficiency is also a matter of responsibility to our own country, our land, our people. We have mentioned the chains here, so I would like to mention the research of the Center for the Research of Public Opinion, and I have selected two topics. One, what are people's decisions based on mainly? It's the price. It's always the price, and the significance of price is even growing, and it is given priority over the composition of food or the origin of food. And at the same time, the Czech Republic, if compared to Europe, has a huge amount of hypermarkets and supermarkets, and mostly they are foreign entities owned, and they do not have to reflect the situation, the domestic capacities and production in the Czech Republic and the Czech Republic's priorities. As regards farmers' markets, for example, which are so popular now as well, you can see that their importance is very small compared to the normal standard day-to-day behavior of shoppers. So we must take into account all that. We have also mentioned the law on major market power or significant major power. And I believe that the practice of the retail chains should be reviewed by the tax authorities in the Czech Republic, even though they are not doing so. And the last concept I would like to mention, self-sufficiency means having sufficient capacity to meet the food demand, food consumption in one's own country, but then it's also food sovereignty. So it means you should be able to control or influence how food is processed and how it reaches the end consumer. And the chains practice and the dominance of the foreign chains has a negative impact on the farmers who are at the very end of the chain. So if we are talking about self-sufficiency, we should add food sovereignty to it and perceive this as one notion, one concept. Also, the role of cooperative is important. The cooperative's image has deteriorated because of the historical aspects, but they should play a more significant role in production and also in supplies and sales. And last but not least, we should mention mention the current agricultural policy, which gives priority to small farms that simply cannot contribute really to the goal of self-sufficiency. They can produce local specialties, but they cannot produce sufficient supplies for the whole population. And the current policy actually creates barriers and creates conflicts among farmers themselves. Even the law on significant market power has tools to eliminate unfair practices against farmers. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much for attention.